With spring just around the corner, I wanted to make use of the last of the winter to continue on with some more woodland management. In the previous episode, I showed you the traditional craft of hedge laying, a technique that has been used in Britain for thousands of years and is still used to this day. It involved the partial cutting of hedgerow trees, such as hazel, folding them over, and then pinning them in with stakes and binders. The key is to leave enough bark and cambium layer on the folded tree so that water and nutrients can be moved up and down. Essentially, the tree is still living, except this time it will grow new vertical shoots in its horizontal laying position. The goal here is to create a natural, living hedge to keep stock from the field from wandering into the woodland, but also to encourage biodiversity and create a brand new wildlife habitat for birds and mammals. It's a great job to take on in winter, as the sap in the trees is dormant, and so that come spring, when the sap rises, the trees will begin to grow new shoots. I have been making the most of this dormancy in the trees, and it has now led me onto another traditional craft, known as coppicing. In simple terms, coppicing is the cutting down of trees down to the stump to encourage new growth in the following years. As a species, us humans have been doing this for over 6,000 years. It's a very traditional craft that is still done today. Coppicing is making use of a renewable resource, often from the same original tree stump. In Britain, it was done for hundreds of years, but fell into decline in the 20th century due to the increase in the use of fossil fuels and the rising popularity of plantation forestry. However, since the 1950s, it has been on the rise again, as those who are interested in ecology, woodland crafts, and in reviving a tradition that was once ingrained in small woodland culture. The southern counties of West Sussex and Hampshire are the heartland of the hazel coppice industry. Now, I only own a small woodland of just a few acres, which is part of a much wider woodland. The small hazel tree dominates this area, and it has not been managed for many years. With just a little cutting back, it can greatly help to enhance the biodiversity of the woodland, whilst at the same time, I can get a resource to use for various woodland crafts, such as the hedge laying which I did in the previous episodes. Common hazel, or Coryllis avellana, is a very common small tree in the UK and across Europe. It's a member of the Betulaceae family, the same family that silver birch is within, and so there are often similarities, especially in the bark pattern during the early stages of growth. You can see it has a grey-brown colour to it, and is dotted with tiny lines which are called lenticels. This is a porous area where the gaseous exchange occurs, and is essentially how the tree breathes. In summer, it's easily identified by its leaves, which are soft to the touch as a result of tiny hairs on the underside. But at this time of year, which is winter, it can be identified by its large yellow catkins, which stand out amongst other trees. If you look closely at the buds, you might also be able to spot the pink, spider-like strands from the buds of the female flower further down the stem. This is what will eventually turn into the hazelnut. Now, it's important not to confuse coppicing with deforestation. Coppicing can be highly beneficial to a woodland, and due to the coppicing cycle, or rotation, it enables various species of flora and fauna to flourish as a result. I know there are a number of you that watch my videos who will be thinking, why cut any trees at all? Why not just leave the woodland totally unmanaged as it would have been before humans were around? Well, in answer to that question, if all of our woodlands were totally unmanaged, it would actually create a decrease in biodiversity. Humans have been using wood for buildings, fire, furniture, etc. for thousands of years. It's only in recent times that a massive imbalance has been created due to the increase in demand for housing and the building of roads to help cope with the demands of the ever-growing human population. For many people, coppicing is done as a living. People make money from selling the cut wood, or selling the crafted item that they have made from it. Hazel is a fantastic resource for many crafts. One of the most famous of those is the hazel hurdle. I made a video on how to make a hazel hurdle, which you can head to in the video description below. The Celtic roundhouse that I built on the channel had walls that were made from coppiced hazel woven in together. The thatching spars that were used to pin the thatch to the rafters was also made from hazel. The roof of the Viking turf house was made using hazel hurdles as a support. It's a great bushcraft resource. However, I only have a relatively small amount of hazel in my woodland, and so I do not intend to coppice the lot, as I will exhaust the resource and have to wait at least 6 years before I could use it for anything else. Hazel also has a tendency to grow multiple shoots from the same stem, and so sometimes it looks like it has been coppiced in the past, when actually it is the same tree that has sent up multiple shoots. This particular corner of my woodland is where I would like to focus on some coppicing. Here's an interesting fact for you. Throughout the life of a broadleaf tree, buds are created in the growing layer underneath the bark. Most of these buds will remain dormant and die off, due to the buds growing further up the tree canopy, where they can get more light. But when the tree is cut low down, it will reallocate its energy into growing these buds and break the dormancy. As I am only using a handsaw for this particular day, I tend to cut the larger hazel trees higher up first, and then cut them off clean at the base. Hazel can fare well when cut right down low. However, if you are cutting a previous coppice, it's best practice to always cut above where the previous cut was made a few years ago. So this is the finished or coppiced stool. This is quite an old stool. There was quite a few mature trees here. I just did a ring count on one of them. I think this one over here was about 15 years old, and this one here was about 20. So this is an old stool, you know, in terms of coppicing and woodland management. This has been unmanaged essentially for 20 plus years. So the trees are quite thick, and if you're looking at it in terms of a resource point of view for things like bushcraft, that's a bit too mature. Really, you'd only need it 6 to 10 years old. Not even that, probably 6 years old really. That's traditionally how they would have coppiced hazel, was on about roughly a 6-year cycle. That would give you something of about that diameter, not far off that size, but very straight. So that's a much better resource when green to be able to weave, bend, fold into hazel hurdles, hedge laying like I've done over there with the binders in the previous episode, or episode before that, sorry. That's the more ideal resource. But this, although at first it looks a bit barbaric, chopping down loads of trees, don't confuse this with the deforestation that's going on in South America and things like that, where, you know, they're ploughing through, you know, hundreds of thousands of acres of trees to create things like palm oil and things like that. That's not what this is about. This is going to be beneficial for the woodland, because what's happened now is it's opened up all the light in this area, and it's going to allow lots of these ground plants, these dormant bulbs and dormant plants that haven't seen light for many, many years, it's going to allow them to flourish, and as a result those will flower and help bee populations with pollination and things like that. But it will just encourage so much more diversity by having a bit more light hitting the forest floor. I'm not in the position where I need to be selling the wood that I have here, the hazel, for things like hazel hurdles and all sorts of things like that. I don't need to be doing that. Because of the nature of what I do with filming and YouTube, I'm really just coppicing very small areas as I go. Probably I'll do another 3 or 4 of these, maybe 5, and then I'll leave it for a good few years, and then I'll head on over to a totally different area of my woodland the following year, do a bit of coppicing there. And so essentially I'm going to do patches of coppicing rather than lock down all of my hazel. I would have then used up all my resources within 1 year, which is a bit pointless from my perspective. I'm not, like I say, I'm not selling it, so there's no need for me to do that. So I'm just going to do it in patches, and it's going to be an experiment, because I'm interested to see how these come back and how fast they grow. I've left some of the small shoots that are already coming out the bottom of the stumps on there, but I'm going to document this process on my channel every year, come back to these stalls that I'll be cutting and just document how much growth has come from them. So some will be different than others because of the nature of the way the sun moves around the sky and where they face the aspect, how much light they get. Some will grow faster than others. But I would be really interested in 6 years' time to see what this stall looks like. What you might notice is that all of the cuts of the hazel are at angles away from the centre of the stall, and that's to help shed any rainwater, to stop it collecting in the middle here, and any leaves and things like that, they should fall off, just to prevent any basically rot or any chance of it to get bacteria breakdown and things. And standing water in this area here is obviously not going to help the tree too much in the long run. So by forcing these angles when you cut and keeping them nice and smooth, that's going to help prevent any build-up of dirt, debris, things like that, water, that's going to encourage rot and decay in the tree. Now, I would normally, this is a big stall, if you see here, this is quite a big stall, there's big roots coming out of it. I would normally go a little bit lower than this, to be honest. This is quite high, a bit too high for a coppice stall. You know, I could come right down here. The difficulty being is that today I'm only using a handsaw, and to start hand sawing all the way, you know, much lower down here, it's going to take a very long time. Just to give you an idea, this particular stall took over an hour, and that's because not just cutting with the handsaw, but also limbing all the branches and getting them out of the way as well. If I had a chainsaw, I could probably do that in 15-20 minutes, including the limbing of the branches. So that just gives you an idea. Personally, I think using hand tools, getting sweaty, burning that energy, it's good for your mind, it's good for your soul, it clears your head, helps you connect a lot more with nature. But I can see the idea that using a power tool gets the job done a lot quicker. So I will use a chainsaw on some of them just to coppice a little bit quicker. But for me, and for this episode, and what I'm trying to get across, it's all about reconnecting with nature. This one has lots of very young whippy shoots. This is kind of, even that's a bit big. Those two are a bit big in terms of bushcraft resources, but these smaller ones would be great in about 3 years' time. They'll be a perfect diameter. But just to give you an idea, this one's not been coppiced, I don't think, in the past. This is just naturally how it's grown, because hazel can shoot multiple stems from one kind of root system. So it's deceiving. Sometimes you think it's been coppiced. Actually, it hasn't. Hazel, in its nature, shoots multiple stems like this from the one root system. the one stall, sorry. So just be aware of that as well when you're thinking, oh, that's been coppiced. It's not necessarily always been coppiced. It does grow multiple stems. So this is a really ideal size for a handsaw, and this one I can get nice and low to the ground. What I'm doing as well when I cut is I'm making sure, I'll show you here really closely. If you look just there is a kind of dormant bud, and I was talking about this, that these trees, they have dormant buds all the way growing up the bark that don't come out and flourish into a branch because they're lower down, they don't get as much light. But if you're coppicing, you don't really want to cut below the lowest bud. So I don't really want to go below that, because that's going to mean that it's going to be much harder for any new shoots to grow up. They will grow up, like they do here lower down, but if I leave that bud there and go just above it, that's going to allow that, the tree will automatically think, I've been cut, I need to send new energy into new shoots. Well, if there's one that's already there ready to go, let's send the energy to that shoot, and it should grow much faster. So just a little thing to note there is to not cut it too low and flush with the ground, but just allow a good couple of inches off the bottom of the base of the root system, or the forest floor, just to promote that newer growth. There you go. Now there's a little bit hanging there of bark. I'm going to get rid of that because you want a flush stool. You want it nice and flush and flat and smooth. You don't want jaggedy saw cuts. If you make a jaggedy saw cut, then make sure you cut it a little bit lower so that you've got a smooth cut so no water will sit in it. And that is an ideal handsaw size for coppicing. There's buds, you can't really see it this side. Left that bud on that side. Even these tiny little shoots here, I can feel it there. There's a bud there. So that's going to start to shoot up new ones as well. Nature is awesome. This will, in a couple of years, start shooting back.
I wanted to take a break from coppicing my woodland for a bit, just to take you guys on a little field trip to an area of coppice nearby, which can really give you an idea of how successful coppicing can be. Here, amongst these tall trees in the background, are hundreds of small saplings. As I walk further into this opening in the woods, you can start to see a number of small trees protruding from large, cut tree trunks. These are sweet chestnut trees, and this is what a sweet chestnut coppice can look like. How do I know it's sweet chestnut? Well, the first giveaway is the abundance of large, spear-like leaves with serrated edges. These are synonymous with the leaves of the sweet chestnut. Sweet chestnut, or Castanea sativa, was brought over to England by the Romans, as the trees produce an abundance of sweet-flavoured nuts in the autumn months. But they were later used as a coppice material because they produce wood which is highly rot-resistant, and thus is great for using as fencing posts. The smaller trees, like these grown here, are great for chestnut paling, a type of split fencing which is very popular. You can see that the bark on young trees is very smooth and green. As it gets older, it morphs into a gnarly looking tree with large twisted fissures in the bark. The tree is also known to create new shoots from the base, and this is why it is a great tree to coppice. You can see by these tree stumps that many of them would have been quite old, but the interesting thing with chestnut trees is that they can regenerate new growth even when cut back from high up the trunk. If I were to cut all my hazel to the stump, this is roughly what it would look like in about 8 years' time. However, hazel is often coppiced on a 6-year rotation, as that gives you the ideal diameter wood for weaving hazel hurdles, and many other woodland craft projects. And there you have it, a brief insight into the world of coppicing. Like I said earlier in the episode, I don't intend to do much coppicing in my woodland, as I don't want to deplete the resources quickly. But one thing I should mention when coppicing is to make sure to leave woodland corridors between areas of hazel in order to help protect and encourage the elusive hazel dormouse, which is a protected species in the UK. Always be sure to check that each hazel tree that you are felling has any signs of the hazel dormouse. It might also be worth making some hazel dormouse boxes to help give a safe refuge for them, but I will cover this in a different episode. Many thanks for watching this video, As usual, if you want to follow along with every episode of my Woodland Life series, then there is a link in the video description below, or just search TA Outdoors Woodland Life on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.